Hello! Now, to kick off this series of teachings on prayer, I want to look at a few examples of prayer in the Bible. Now, the first of these is the feeding of the 5,000 men. In John chapter 6 verse 11 we read, "And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to his disciples." Now, nowhere in any of the gospel accounts of this episode is there any hint that Jesus prayed anything more than a very simple prayer of thanksgiving. Now, the next thing is the raising of Lazarus from the dead, and this we read in John chapter 11 verses 41 and 42. "And Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me, and I know that you always hear me. But because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me." And that's it. It's just a very simple prayer of thanksgiving. And finally, Jesus' parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector. Now, just a little bit of background here. The Pharisees were the people who considered themselves to be righteous. On the other hand, the tax collector would most likely have been very corrupt, using their Roman appointed position to collect hugely excessive taxes from the local folk. So they were considered as being the lowest of the scum, hugely wealthy, but also hugely despised. Now, this parable we read in Luke chapter 18 verses 9 to 14, and it's Jesus speaking. "Also, he spoke this parable to some who trusted in themselves, that they were righteous and despised others. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee, the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood and prayed thus with himself, God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even as this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I possess." And the tax collector, standing afar off, would not so much as raise his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, "God, be merciful to me, a sinner." I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Now, in this parable, Jesus praises the prayer of the tax collector. It was a very short prayer, direct, straight to the point. No superfluous waffle, just good old-fashioned grovelling, straight from the heart. Now, Jesus in prayer in Luke chapter 6 verse 12. "Now it came to pass in those days that he went out to the mountain to pray, and continued all night in prayer to God." This is the opposite of the above examples. Jesus prayed all night. What, how he prayed, we are not told. And the final example of prayer from the Bible that I want to look at is Psalm 119. There are 176 verses that contain round about 2,400 words of prayer. That is one long prayer. Now, looking at a lot of other prayers recorded in the Bible, we cannot see a formula for prayer. In those Bible verses we've just looked at, and all the others, Jesus, although he gave his disciples what we call the Lord's Prayer, he himself is not recorded using it. When feeding the 5,000 men, you'd have thought he could at least have recited the line, "Give us this day our daily bread." But he didn't. Now, I'm not saying don't use the Lord's Prayer. It is marvellous and has amazing depths to it. And I think we don't use it enough, nor study it enough. So although there is no formula to prayer, there are some pointers that can be applied if you want to know what to pray and increase the likelihood of those prayers being answered. So that's all for now. Thank you and goodbye.